She mourned strangers because no one had mourned her, until something ancient noticed her grief and decided it was worth protecting. The cemetery at the edge of Ashford had no name. It existed in that liminal space between the living town and the wilderness beyond, a place where headstones leaned like drunken sentinels, where names had weathered into illegible whispers, where the forgotten came to rest without ceremony or witness, except for her. Iris Caldwell came every Thursday evening, just as the light bled from the sky and the air turned cold enough to see her breath. She carried a wicker basket heavy with tea candles, matches wrapped in wax paper, and sometimes wildflowers stolen from the roadside. She was 23, but moved like someone much older. Her shoulders curved inward as if carrying invisible weight. She had been doing this for 3 years. No one asked why. Her mother had stopped asking after the first 6 months, deciding it was grief. Iris's younger brother had drowned when she was 17, and perhaps this ritual was her way of making peace with death. Her co-workers at the bookshop whispered that she was odd, sweet but odd, the kind of girl who read poetry at lunch and never went to bars on Friday nights. They didn't know the truth. Iris lit candles for the forgotten because she knew what it felt like to be unseen. She knelt before a grave so old the stone had split down the middle. The inscription was gone, but she had memorized its position, 3rd row from the oak tree, 4 graves west of the iron fence. She placed a candle in the frosted grass and struck a match. The flame trembled, caught, held. "I don't know your name," she whispered, "but someone should remember you existed." She moved through the cemetery like a ritual dancer, lighting candles at graves no one visited anymore. A child who died in 1847, a woman with no surname, a man whose stone simply read Stranger, 1902. She spoke to each of them softly, telling them about her day, about the books she'd read, about the weather. It was madness, she knew. Beautiful, necessary madness. She didn't notice him watching until she reached the center of the cemetery. He stood beneath the oldest oak, so still he might have been carved from shadow. Tall, impossibly tall, dressed in black that seemed to drink the twilight. His face was pale as bone, sharp as winter, and his eyes, God, his eyes were the color of smoke and centuries. Iris froze, candle halfway to the ground. "You come here often," he said. His voice was low, careful, like someone who had forgotten how to speak to the living. She should have run. Every instinct screamed at her to drop the basket and flee. But something in his posture, the way he held himself apart, the way his hands remained at his sides, open and unthreatening, kept her rooted. "Every Thursday," she heard herself say, "for 3 years." It wasn't a question. He knew. "You've been watching me." Her voice was steadier than she felt. "I have." He stepped forward, and the candlelight caught his features. Beautiful and terrible, like a cathedral before it burns. I wanted to understand why a living girl would mourn the dead with such devotion. They deserve to be remembered, even the damned? The question hung between them like smoke. Iris set down the candle and lit it. The small flame guttered in the wind, then steadied. "Everyone deserves light," she said quietly, "even if they died in darkness." Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, but a softening. A recognition of something he thought had been lost to him forever. "My name is Malachi," he said. "I am very old and very alone. And for 3 years I have watched you bring light to graves that included my own." She looked at him, truly looked, and saw the exhaustion beneath the immortality. The weight of centuries in his shoulders, the loneliness that mirrored her own. "You have a grave here?" "I did. Once." He gestured to a plot near the back where she had lit candles dozens of times. "Before I learned that death is not an ending for some of us, only an intermission. You're a vampire," Yes. He said it without drama, without menace, just a fact, like being left-handed or afraid of storms. And you have been lighting candles at my memorial for 3 years, speaking to the man I was before I became this. Iris's heart hammered, but not from fear, from something stranger, recognition, as if some part of her had always known the dead were listening. Did it help? She asked. The candles. Malachi looked at her with eyes that had seen empires fall and loved ones turn to dust. You have no idea, he said softly, how much light a single candle can give to someone who has lived in darkness for 400 years. The wind picked up, scattering leaves across the graves. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolled 7 times. I should go, Iris whispered, though she didn't move. You should, Malachi agreed. But you won't, because you recognize me, don't you? Not as a monster, as someone who understands what it's like to be invisible. She did. God help her, she did. Will you come back? He asked. Next Thursday? Iris looked at the candles flickering across the cemetery, tiny rebellions against the encroaching dark. She thought of the loneliness that had driven her here in the first place, the ache of being seen by no one. Yes, she said, I'll come back. Malachi smiled then, a real smile, sad and grateful and impossibly human. Then I will be here, he promised, waiting in the light you bring. Iris returned the following Thursday, though she told herself it was foolish. She had spent the week convincing herself that Malachi had been a dream, a hallucination brought on by too many Gothic novels and not enough sleep. Vampires didn't exist. And if they did, they certainly didn't haunt provincial cemeteries waiting for lonely girls who lit candles for strangers. But when she arrived at dusk, basket in hand, he was there. He stood in the same spot beneath the oak, reading the inscription on a nearby grave. He looked different in the fading light, less like a nightmare, more like a painting that had stepped out of its frame. He wore a dark wool coat that might have been fashionable a century ago, and his hair caught the last rays of sun like spilled ink. You came, he said, not turning. I said I would. People say many things. He finally looked at her, and his expression was unreadable. They rarely mean them. Iris set down her basket and began lighting candles, moving through her ritual with practiced ease. Malachi watched in silence, and she found herself acutely aware of his gaze, not invasive, but curious, as if he were studying a text in a language he'd forgotten. Why do you do this? He asked after she'd lit the 7th candle. I told you, they deserve to be remembered. But why you? Why not their families, their descendants? Iris paused, match halfway to wick. Because I know what it's like to be forgotten while you're still alive. The confession came out before she could stop it. She waited for him to laugh, to dismiss her melodrama. Instead, he moved closer, settling onto a weathered bench near the fence. Tell me, he said simply. And somehow, in a cemetery at twilight, with a vampire who claimed to be 400 years old, Iris found herself talking. She told him about her brother's drowning, about how her parents' grief had consumed them so completely they forgot they had another child. About becoming invisible in her own home, a ghost among the living. About the loneliness that felt like drowning in slow motion. So I started coming here, she finished, to the people everyone else forgot, because at least here, my attention mattered. Malachi was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with something that might have been emotion. I was human once, he said. In 1624, I was a physician in Prague during the plague. I stayed when others fled. I held the hands of the dying, closed the eyes of the dead. I believed I was doing God's work. He laughed bitterly. And then I caught the plague myself. I was 29 years old, and I lay in a mass grave, not quite dead, but too weak to climb out. Iris stopped lighting candles. She sat on the bench beside him, close enough to see the silver threading through his dark hair, the ancient sadness in his eyes. "A vampire found me there," he continued. "She said I was too stubborn to die, too good to waste. She gave me a choice, true death or eternal life with a thirst for blood. I chose eternity because I was terrified of the dark." He met Iris's gaze. "I've regretted it almost every night since." "Why?" "Because immortality is just loneliness in slow motion," he said. "Everyone you love turns to dust. Every connection you make becomes a countdown to grief. After a while, you stop trying. You exist, you don't live." "But you stayed here," Iris said. "In Ashford. Why?" Malachi gestured to the cemetery around them. "This place. It's where I buried my humanity. There's a grave here with my name, my dates, a lie about how I died serving the sick. My maker arranged it before she left me. For 3 centuries, I avoided this town entirely. And then, 50 years ago, I returned. I don't know why. Nostalgia, masochism, the need to remember what it felt like to be human. And then I started lighting candles. And then you started lighting candles." His voice softened. "At first, I was angry. I thought you were mocking the dead, performing grief for attention. But I kept watching and I realized you were the only living person who treated the dead with genuine tenderness. You spoke to them like they mattered. You remembered them. Including you. Including the man I was. Yes." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of earth and old stone. Iris found herself studying Malachi's profile, the aristocratic nose, the sharp line of his jaw, the way sadness had carved itself into his features like erosion. "What does it feel like?" she asked. "Being immortal?" "Like watching a river flow by while you're trapped under ice," he said. "You see life happening, but you can't touch it, can't be part of it. After a while, you forget what warmth feels like." "And what does it feel like now, talking to me?" He turned to her, and his eyes were luminous in the gathering dark. "Like remembering," he whispered, "like thawing." The moment stretched between them, fragile and dangerous. Iris knew she should leave, should run from this beautiful, broken creature who had lived for centuries and seen everyone he loved decay. But something in her recognized something in him. The same loneliness, the same hunger not for blood, but for connection, for being seen. "I have to feed," Malachi said abruptly, standing. "Not here, never here, but I need to go before—" He trailed off, jaw tight. "Before what?" "Before I start hoping this could be more than Thursday evenings in a cemetery." He looked at her with devastating honesty. "I am a monster, Iris. I survive by drinking blood from the living. I have done terrible things in 400 years. And if you're wise, you'll light your candles and never speak to me again." Iris stood, her heart thundering. "And if I'm not wise?" "Then we're both damned," he said softly, "because I haven't wanted to know someone in 200 years. And wanting is the most dangerous thing an immortal can do." He vanished then, not walked away, but simply ceased to be there, leaving only disturbed air and the scent of old books and snow. Iris stood alone among the candles, their small lights defiant against the dark. She would come back next Thursday. She knew she would. The 3rd Thursday, it rained. Iris came anyway, her candles useless in the downpour, her coat soaked through within minutes. She stood in the center of the cemetery, water streaming down her face, feeling ridiculous and desperate and utterly alive. Malachi appeared like smoke solidifying into flesh. "You shouldn't be here," he said. But he was already moving toward her, pulling off his coat and draping it over her shoulders. It smelled of cedar and something else. Time, maybe, or memory. "The candles won't light," Iris said through chattering teeth. "No, they won't." He looked at her with something between exasperation and wonder. "You're going to catch pneumonia." I've had worse. I doubt that. I've had lonelier, she corrected, and his expression shifted. Come, he said quietly. There's a mausoleum. It's dry. He led her to an ornate stone structure at the cemetery's edge, the kind of edifice wealthy families built to house their dead in style. The door hung open on rusted hinges. Inside, it was surprisingly intact. Stone benches, stained glass windows depicting angels and resurrection, candle holders bolted to the walls. Malachi produced matches from somewhere, an anachronistic silver case engraved with initials worn smooth by centuries. He lit the wall candles, and warm light bloomed across marble and shadow. "Whose tomb is this?" Iris asked, wringing water from her hair. "The Ashford family. They owned half the county in the 1700s. The last of them died in 1889. No descendants. No one comes here anymore." He sat on a stone bench, looking impossibly at home among the dead. "I've used it as shelter for years. The dead are excellent roommates. They never complain, never judge." Iris sat across from him, pulling his coat tighter around her shoulders. "Do you have a home? Somewhere you actually live?" "I have places I exist," he said. "A house on the outskirts of town, old, isolated. I bought it in 1923 and let people assume I'm my own descendant when necessary." He paused. "But I don't have a home. Haven't for a very long time." "What makes a place home?" "Someone waiting for you when you return." His eyes met hers. "Someone who notices when you don't." The rain drummed against the mausoleum roof, a percussive rhythm that felt like a heartbeat. Iris found herself studying Malachi in the candlelight, the way shadows pooled in the hollow of his throat, the slight upturn of his mouth that suggested he'd once smiled often, before centuries taught him otherwise. "Why do you feed on blood?" she asked suddenly. "I mean, I know you're a vampire, but why blood specifically? What does it do?" Most people would have bristled at the question. Malachi simply nodded, as if he'd been expecting it. "Blood is life," he said. "Not metaphorically, literally. It carries memories, emotions, vitality. When I drink, I don't just sustain my body. I remember what it feels like to be alive, to feel warmth, hunger, joy, fear." He looked away. "It's parasitic. I steal life to recall what living felt like, and every time I'm reminded of what I lost." "Do you kill?" "Not anymore." His voice was iron. "I did, once. In the early years, when I was learning control, when the bloodlust owned me instead of the other way around." He met her gaze unflinchingly. "I've killed 14 people, Iris. I remember every name, every face. I will carry them until something finally destroys me." He said it without excuse, without plea for forgiveness. Just truth, raw and terrible. "And now," Iris whispered, "now I feed from those who won't miss a few hours of memory. The drunk, the desperate, the ones who won't remember a pale man in the alley who left them dizzy but alive. I take only what I need. I leave money in their pockets. It's not redemption." His jaw tightened. "But it's all I have." Iris absorbed this, the weight of his confession settling between them like sediment. She should have been terrified, should have run screaming into the rain. Instead, she felt a strange, aching compassion for this creature who had lived for centuries carrying his sins like stones. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because you asked. Because I'm tired of lying. Because—" He stopped, ran a hand through his hair. "Because if you're going to keep coming here, keep talking to me, you deserve to know what I am. Not the romantic version, the truth." "And what if the truth doesn't scare me?" "Then you're a fool," he said softly. "Or you're as lonely as I am. Can't I be both?" Something like a smile ghosted across his face. "Yes," he admitted, "you can be both." The rain eased to a whisper. Iris stood, moved to the stained glass window. The angel depicted there had a sword and sorrowful eyes, wings spread in protection or farewell. "Do you believe in God?" she asked. "After everything?" "I don't know," Malachi said. "I've lived long enough to see faith move mountains and justify atrocities. I've watched religions rise and fall, seen good people do evil things in His name, and evil people do good." He joined her at the window. "If God exists, I think He's less concerned with our damnation and more interested in what we do with the broken pieces we're given." "And you've done good with yours?" "I've tried." He looked at her with devastating honesty. "For 200 years, I existed in shadow. I fed, I hid, I survived. And then you appeared, lighting candles for the forgotten, and something in me remembered why I became a physician in the first place, why I stayed during the plague when I could have fled. Why? Because someone has to bear witness to suffering," he said. "Someone has to say, 'You mattered, your pain was real, you were here.'" He touched the glass, tracing the angel's wing. "That's what you do every Thursday. You bear witness, and watching you. It reminded me I could do more than just survive." Iris's throat tightened. "What have you done?" "Small things. Anonymous donations to hospices. Appearing at accidents to give blood, literally and medically. Finding missing persons and leaving tips for police." He smiled grimly. "Nothing grand. Nothing that absolves me. But maybe enough to balance the scales a fraction." The rain had stopped entirely. Through the doorway, Iris could see stars emerging between clouds, the cemetery silvered with moonlight. "I should go," she said, though she didn't move. "You should," Malachi agreed. He handed her the basket of candles she'd abandoned. "But before you do, will you come back? Do you want me to?" "More than I've wanted anything in 2 centuries," he said quietly. "Which is exactly why you shouldn't." Iris looked at him, this beautiful damned creature who had lived for 400 years and chosen to spend his eternity in a cemetery keeping vigil over the dead, who carried his sins like shackles, who had been alone so long he'd forgotten what hope tasted like. "Next Thursday," she said, "same time." His relief was so naked it hurt to see. "Next Thursday," he echoed. "I'll be here. And now I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these immortal confessions travel and at what moments of the night they find you." Iris didn't light candles that Thursday. She arrived with a thermos of coffee and 2 cups and found Malachi already waiting, his expression somewhere between apprehension and hope. "I thought we could talk," she said, "somewhere warm." "The mausoleum." "Your house," she interrupted. "You said you had one. I'd like to see it." Malachi went very still. "Iris, if you come to my home, there's no pretending this is casual. No pretending you're just a kind girl who lights candles and I'm just, what, a friendly monster? There are lines we're approaching. Maybe I want to cross them. You don't know what you're saying." "Then show me," she said quietly. "Show me your life, your real life, not just the Thursday night version. If you want me to understand what you are, let me see how you live." He studied her for a long moment, shadows pooling in his eyes. Finally, he nodded. "My car is outside the cemetery. It's a 10-minute drive." His car was a beautifully maintained 1967 Jaguar E-Type, black as sin and somehow deeply appropriate. Iris slid into the leather passenger seat while Malachi drove with the careful precision of someone who'd learned to drive when cars were still novelties. They rode in silence through the dark countryside, past farmhouses with warm windows and towns sleeping under streetlights. Eventually, they turned down a long gravel drive flanked by overgrown hedges, and a house emerged from the darkness, a Victorian mansion, all turrets and gables and widows' walks, surrounded by ancient oaks. "My God," Iris breathed, "it's like something from a novel." "It is from a novel," Malachi said dryly. "Specifically, every Gothic horror written between 1880 and 1920. I bought it because it reminded me of home, Prague, the architecture of memory." Inside, the house was a strange collision of eras. Victorian furniture mixed with mid-century modern pieces, bookshelves crammed with volumes in a dozen languages, an old gramophone beside a sleek sound system, candles and electric lights. It felt like a museum curated by someone who couldn't decide which century he belonged to. "Welcome," Malachi said, "to 400 years of indecision." Iris wandered through the rooms, touching spines of books, examining framed photographs of people long dead. In the study, she found a wall covered in sketches, anatomical drawings from what looked like the Renaissance mixed with modern medical diagrams. "You still practice medicine?" she asked. "In a sense." He joined her, hands in his pockets. "I volunteer at a free clinic in the city, under a pseudonym with carefully forged credentials. I work night shifts. I'm particularly good with blood disorders." The irony in his voice was sharp. "I've had 4 centuries to perfect my craft. I may be damned, but I can still close a wound." In the kitchen, updated but retaining its original copper fixtures, Malachi made tea with the ease of long practice. Iris sat at a worn wooden table scarred with centuries of use, accepting the cup he offered. "How do you do it?" she asked. "Live this long without going insane?" "Who says I haven't?" He sat across from her. "Sanity is relative. I've had periods of, let's call them lapses. Decades where I existed but didn't live. Times when I seriously considered walking into sunlight and ending it." He sipped his tea. "What keeps me here is curiosity, mostly. The world keeps changing. New music, new ideas, new ways of being human. I'm addicted to watching humanity evolve." "But you're not part of it." "No." The single word carried oceans of loss. "I'm a witness, an observer. I can participate superficially, but I can never truly belong. It's like watching a film you can never enter, no matter how much you want to touch the screen." Iris set down her cup. "Show me more." He led her upstairs to what he called his memory room, a space lined with shelves holding objects from across centuries, a surgeon's kit from 1650, a gramophone record from 1920s Paris, letters tied with ribbon, a child's toy soldier, photographs faded to sepia. "These are people I knew," Malachi said softly, touching a photograph of a woman in Victorian dress. "Maria. I loved her. She knew what I was. We had 17 years before age took her, and I stayed frozen at 29. He moved to another photo, a young man in a WWI uniform. "Thomas, my friend. He died at the Somme. I was there, working as a field medic. I held him while he bled out." Each object was a ghost. Each photograph, a gravestone. "This is what immortality costs," he said. "Everyone you love becomes a memory, and you accumulate so many memories they start to feel like stones in your pockets, weighing you toward the earth." Iris touched a faded ribbon. "Why keep them? Doesn't it hurt?" "Terribly." Malachi's voice was rough. "But forgetting them would be worse. This room is my vigil. My way of saying, you mattered. You were real. You changed me, even though I couldn't change with you." Something in Iris's chest cracked open. She understood suddenly why he'd been drawn to her candle lighting. She was doing for the dead what he did in this room, bearing witness, refusing to let them fade into nothing. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "For what?" "For every loss, every person you couldn't save, every friend who aged while you stayed young." She looked at him with tears in her eyes. "For 400 years of loneliness." Malachi went very still. Then, slowly, he reached out and caught a tear on her cheek with his thumb. His skin was cool, but not cold, just different. "Don't cry for me," he said quietly. "I chose this. Even now, knowing the cost, I'm not sure I'd choose differently. Because if I'd died in that plague pit, I wouldn't have saved the thousands I've saved since, wouldn't have witnessed the fall of empires and the rise of equality, wouldn't have—" He stopped. Wouldn't have what? "Met you," he finished, and his honesty was devastating. Wouldn't have remembered what it feels like to want to know someone. To imagine a Thursday where you don't show up and feeling like the world has lost light. The confession hung between them like something fragile and impossible. "Malachi," Iris said carefully, "what are we doing?" "Something dangerous," he admitted. "Something that will hurt one or both of us, because you're human and I'm not, and there's no version of this where—" She kissed him. It was brief, barely more than a brush of lips, but it silenced him completely. When she pulled back, his eyes were wide with shock and something like fear. "There," she said. "Now we've crossed the line. Now we're both damned, so we might as well figure out what comes next." Malachi stared at her, this fragile, mortal girl who lit candles for strangers and kissed monsters without flinching. "You're going to break my heart," he whispered. "You've had 400 years to repair it," Iris said. "I think it can take one more fracture." Despite everything, despite the weight of centuries and the certainty of loss, Malachi laughed. It was a rusty sound, unpracticed, but real. "Next Thursday," he said. "Same time, but Iris?" "Yes?" "Bring more coffee. If we're doing this, I want to be fully awake for every moment." They fell into a rhythm over the following weeks. Thursdays remained sacred. Cemetery visits, candle lighting, long conversations among the dead. But now there were other days, too. Iris would appear at Malachi's house with takeout food she'd eat while he watched, fascinated by the simple act of nourishment. They'd sit in his library reading. Her mortality and his immortality existing in parallel like trains on separate tracks. He showed her how he fed, clinical, controlled, from blood banks he'd established connections with over decades. She watched him drink from a medical bag with the same detachment a diabetic might inject insulin. Survival, not savagery. "Does it taste like anything?" she asked once. "Like life," he said. "Like everything I'm not." She learned his tells, the way his eyes silvered when he was hungry, the tension in his jaw when he fought the urge, the sadness that crept into his voice when she mentioned future plans, anything beyond the immediate present. "I'm 23, she said one evening, curled in his armchair while he sorted through medical journals. "In 10 years, I'll be 33. In 40 years, 63. And you'll still look exactly like this." "Yes." He didn't look up. "Doesn't that bother you?" "It terrifies me." Finally, he met her gaze. "I've watched people I love grow old and die, Iris. I've held aged hands that were once young and strong. I've seen beauty fade and strength wither, and every time I stay the same. Frozen. A monument to something that can't change." "Then why—" "Because I'm selfish," he interrupted, voice raw. "Because for the first time in 200 years, I want something knowing I can't keep it. Because you make me remember what hope tastes like, even though hope is the cruelest thing I can feel." Iris set down her book. "What if I became like you?" The silence was deafening. Malachi stood so abruptly the journals scattered. "No." "Why not? You said your maker gave you a choice. Give me the same." "Absolutely not." His voice was steel. "Iris, do you understand what you're suggesting? You'd be frozen at 23 forever. You'd watch every friend age and die. Your parents, your family, you'd outlive them all. You'd develop a thirst for blood that would haunt you every day. You'd become a parasite hiding among prey, stealing life to sustain an existence you might come to hate. But I'd be with you. That's not enough." He was in front of her suddenly, hands on the arms of her chair, caging her in. I've lived 400 years, Iris. Do you know how many of those I've wanted to die? How many mornings I've stood before sunrise debating whether to step outside? I wouldn't condemn you to that. I won't. That's not your choice. It absolutely is, he said quietly. I won't be responsible for damning another soul. I carry enough weight. He stepped back, running a hand through his hair. You'll live your natural life. You'll grow old. And I'll be grateful for whatever time we have. Even though it ends. Because it ends, he corrected. Mortality is what makes life precious. If you had forever, would you appreciate right now? Would this moment matter? Iris stood, closing the distance between them. You're wrong about one thing. What? You think immortality made you a monster, but you're the most human person I've ever met. She touched his face, cool skin, sharp cheekbones, eyes that held centuries. You've spent 400 years trying to atone, trying to help, trying to matter. That's not monstrous. That's deeply, achingly human. Malachi caught her hand, pressed it to his chest where a heart beat once every few seconds, slow, deliberate. Conserving life, it no longer generated naturally. I don't want to lose you, he whispered. Then don't waste the time we have worrying about the time we won't. She leaned into him, and he wrapped her in arms that had held empires and lovers and the dying. Love me now, however long now lasts. I already do, he admitted. God help me, I already do. They stood like that, mortal and immortal, holding each other against the inevitable entropy of time. Outside, the world turned. Inside, two lonely souls found temporary shelter in each other's arms. Later, they returned to the cemetery. Iris lit candles while Malachi watched, and this time he helped, his centuries-old hands steadying wicks, his voice joining hers in quiet acknowledgement of the dead. Together, they made light in the darkness, bearing witness to those the world forgot. Do you think they know? Iris asked, gesturing to the graves. The dead, do they know we remember them? I don't know, Malachi said, but I hope so. I hope every candle you light reaches them somehow, tells them they mattered. Like you matter, Iris said, to me. He looked at her then, this bright, impossible girl who had walked into his graveyard vigil and refused to leave, who saw his monstrosity and chose to see his humanity instead. You're going to be my last love, he said quietly. After you. I won't do this again. Won't risk this pain. Then we'd better make it count. They kissed among the headstones, surrounded by candles flickering like defiant stars. Two souls choosing each other despite impossible odds. And for that moment, that perfect, finite moment, immortality and mortality found common ground in the simple act of being seen, being held, being loved. Like if you'd choose finite love over eternal loneliness, even knowing it ends. Malachi began teaching Iris the art of deep seeing. Immortals don't experience time like humans, he explained one evening in his library. Rain pattered against windows old enough to distort glass. You live forward, moment to moment. I live in layers. When I look at this room, I see it as it is now. But I also see it in 1923, when I first bought it. Empty, dusty, full of possibility. I see it in 1950, with different furniture, different light. I see all versions at once. That sounds overwhelming. It is, until you learn to focus. He touched her temple gently. But you can practice. Look at this book. He handed her a leather-bound volume, spine cracked with age. Don't just see the object. See its history, the tree it came from, the hands that bound it, the eyes that read it before yours. Everything contains echoes if you're patient enough to listen. Iris tried. At first, she saw only a book. But as minutes passed and Malachi's cool hand steadied on her shoulder, something shifted. She noticed the grain of the leather, imagined the animal it came from, saw the yellowed pages and thought of the mill that produced them, the printer who set the type, the readers who'd left fingerprints in the margins over centuries. "I see it," she whispered. "Not clearly, but echoes. Like you said." "That's how I experience love," Malachi said softly. "When I hold you, I'm not just holding you now. I'm holding every version of you. The girl you were, the woman you're becoming, the elder you might be. I see all of it at once, and I love every version, even the ones that only exist in potential. Even the one that ages while you don't, especially that one." He turned her to face him. "Because that version proves you lived fully, experienced everything, earned every wrinkle and gray hair. Aging is proof of survival, Iris. It's beautiful." She kissed him for that, for seeing her future self with the same tenderness he saw her present. "Teach me more," she said. "I want to see the world the way you do, just for a little while." So he did. They walked through Ashford at night, and Malachi showed her layers of history invisible to normal sight. "That cafe was a speakeasy in 1925. I drank whiskey there with jazz musicians who'd never be recorded. This park was a battlefield in 1776. I can still smell gunpowder on foggy nights. That church held my friend's funeral in 1889. She died at 93, full of stories, and I sat in the back row where no one would recognize me from her youth. Every building became a palimpsest, every street corner a monument to change." "You carry a museum in your head," Iris marveled. "A graveyard," he corrected. "Everything I see is also something I've lost." They stood on a bridge over a river, watching moonlight fracture on dark water. Malachi's voice was distant, ancient. "I stood on this bridge in 1945 when the war ended. People were celebrating, crying, kissing, dancing. I'd spent 4 years in field hospitals, saving who I could, watching thousands die anyway. And I realized I'd seen 3 major wars, countless minor conflicts, and humanity just kept going, kept loving, building, hoping. It was the first time in a century I thought maybe immortality was worth enduring. Why? Because if they could survive all that, all the horror and loss, and still choose to love anyway, maybe I could too. Maybe survival wasn't just about enduring. Maybe it was about bearing witness to resilience." Iris leaned against him, her warmth seeping through his coat. "Is that what I am to you? Resilience?" "You're the proof that hope isn't foolish," he said. "You light candles for the forgotten. You kiss monsters. You choose tenderness in a world that would excuse cynicism. You're what humanity looks like when it refuses to surrender." "I'm just lonely," she said quietly. "Same as you. Then we're lonely together, which makes us less lonely." He wrapped his arms around her. "Stay tonight, at the house, not for anything. Just stay. Let me pretend for one night that I'm not the only person awake at 3 a.m. She did. They lay in his massive antique bed, not touching beyond linked hands, and he told her stories until dawn. About Prague before the plague, about Paris in the 1920s, when art exploded like fireworks, about a woman in 1850 who taught him that kindness could be revolutionary, about the first time he heard recorded music and wept because human voices could finally outlast death. "You've lived such an extraordinary life," Iris whispered as gray light crept through curtains. "I've lived a long life," he corrected. "Extraordinary is what you make in limited time. You have maybe 60 years left. Iris, what will you do with them that makes them matter?" "Love you," she said simply. "However long that lasts. Bear witness to you, like you've borne witness to everyone else." Malachi turned to her, eyes silver in the dawn. "I don't deserve you. Good thing I'm not asking permission." He laughed, that rusty, unpracticed sound she was teaching him to make again. Then he kissed her forehead, her eyelids, her lips, with a reverence that spoke of centuries learning how fragile life was. "Sleep," he murmured. "I'll keep watch." You always do, she said, and drifted off in the arms of an immortal who had finally found someone worth staying awake for. Outside, the world woke. Inside, two souls defied the separation of mortal and eternal, if only for a handful of hours stolen from time's relentless march. Iris became ill in spring. It started small. Fatigue, headaches, moments of dizziness she dismissed as stress. But Malachi noticed 400 years of medical practice had given him diagnostic instincts that bypassed conscious thought. "Hospital," he said quietly one Thursday when she stumbled lighting a candle. "Now." "I'm fine. You're not." His voice left no room for argument. "I can hear your heartbeat. It's irregular. And your scent." He closed his eyes. "Something's wrong. Please, let me help." She went. The diagnosis came 3 days later. A rare autoimmune condition, aggressive and unpredictable, treatable but chronic. She'd need medication, monitoring, lifestyle changes. Her mortality, already finite, suddenly felt immediate. Malachi took the news with a stillness that scared her more than rage would have. "How long?" he asked the doctor, his voice clinical. With treatment, she could live a normal lifespan. Without it. The doctor hesitated. "Months, maybe. A year at most." After, in his car, Iris waited for him to speak. He drove in silence. Hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel, jaw so tight she heard teeth grinding. "Say something," she whispered. "I'm trying not to scream." His voice was controlled fire. "I'm trying not to drive us to my house, open a vein, and beg you to drink so this becomes irrelevant." "Malachi, I know." He pulled over abruptly, killed the engine. "I know you won't. I know I won't let you. But God, Iris, the one time I want to use this curse for something good, and I can't, because it would damn you worse than it damned me." He slammed his palm against the steering wheel, and she heard the plastic crack. "You're 400 years old," Iris said quietly. "You've lost everyone. This shouldn't surprise you." "It doesn't surprise me." He turned to her, eyes silver and wet. "It destroys me. There's a difference. Expecting loss doesn't make it hurt less. It just means you see it coming and are powerless to stop it anyway." She took his hand, cool, steady, capable of such violence and such tenderness. "I'm getting treatment. I'm going to fight this, but I need you to accept that I'm mortal. That's what you wanted, remember? For me to live naturally. I wanted you to have 70 years, not 23, cut short by biological treachery." His voice cracked. "I wanted to watch you grow old slowly, gracefully, surrounded by grandchildren and accomplishments. Not this. Never this. Then help me make the time I have matter." She cupped his face. "No wasted days, no fear-based decisions, just life. Real, messy, beautiful life. Can you do that?" He looked at her, this fragile, defiant girl who refused to treat her mortality as tragedy, who faced disease the way she'd faced him, with curiosity and courage and a stubborn insistence on hope. "Yes," he said finally, "I can do that." Treatment began immediately. Chemotherapy, immunosuppressants, weekly monitoring. Iris handled it with the same quiet determination she brought to everything. Her hair thinned but didn't fall. Her strength waned but didn't vanish. She adapted. Malachi became her shadow. He drove her to every appointment, sat in waiting rooms reading medical journals, correcting outdated information under his breath. Used his centuries of knowledge to advocate for her treatment, to question protocols, to ensure she received the best care available. "You're terrifying the doctors," Iris said, after he'd spent 20 minutes debating immunosuppressant dosages with her oncologist. "Good. They should be terrified of getting it wrong." But at night, in his house where she now spent most evenings, his control would fracture. She'd find him in the memory room, surrounded by photographs of people he'd loved and lost, shoulders shaking with silent grief. "Come here," she'd say, and he'd fold into her arms, this ancient creature seeking comfort from someone who might not see another spring. "I can't do this again," he'd whisper against her hair. "I've buried so many people. I thought I'd become numb to it. But you— God, Iris, losing you will break something in me I won't recover from." "Then we make every moment count." She'd pull back, force him to meet her eyes. "No mourning me while I'm still here. No treating me like I'm already gone. I'm alive, Malachi. Right now I'm alive. Be here with me." So he was. They stopped wasting time on fear. Instead, they lived deliberately, greedily, extracting joy from every ordinary moment. They danced in his library to music from a dozen eras. She taught him to make her favorite food so he could remember the smell. He read her poetry in languages she didn't speak, translating between verses, giving her centuries of beauty condensed into evenings. They made love carefully, reverently, his cool skin against her warm flesh, two temperatures finding equilibrium in the dark. He learned every freckle, every scar, every sound she made, cataloging her the way he'd cataloged history, desperate to remember when memory was all he'd have left. "I love you," she said one night, tracing the line of his jaw. "Not despite what you are, because of who you've chosen to be with what you are." "I love you," he answered, "with every year I've lived and every year I have left. Which means I love you 400 times more than any human could, and it still isn't enough." On Thursdays, they still went to the cemetery. But now Malachi lit candles too, kneeling beside her in the grass, speaking to the dead with new understanding. "I get it now," he told a nameless headstone, "why she does this. It's not about preventing them from being forgotten. It's about proving that being remembered is possible, that mattering is possible, that love survives even death." "You've always known that," Iris said quietly, intellectually. "But now I feel it." He looked at her. "When you die, and you will, despite every instinct in me screaming to prevent it, I'll keep your memory alive the way you've kept theirs alive. I'll light candles. I'll speak your name. I'll make sure the universe knows Iris Caldwell existed and changed everything." "Promise me something else," she said. "Anything. After I'm gone, don't stop living. Don't retreat into centuries of solitude. Keep helping people. Keep bearing witness. Keep—" Her voice broke. "Keep being the man I fell in love with. The one who remembered that immortality means you have endless chances to do good." Malachi pulled her close, and she felt wetness on her hair. Tears from a creature who'd thought himself beyond them. "I promise," he whispered. "I'll live, for you, because of you, until something finally ends me." 6 months into treatment, Iris went into remission. The disease wasn't gone, might never be fully gone, but it retreated. Her strength returned. Her future, while still uncertain, stretched beyond the immediate horizon of death. Malachi wept when the doctor delivered the news, centuries of control shattering in a hospital waiting room. This ancient vampire sobbing with relief in a plastic chair while Iris held him and laughed and cried too. "You're staying," he kept saying, like a prayer. "You're staying." "For now," she corrected. "For as long as I can." "It's enough," he said fiercely. "However long it is, it's enough." But they both knew the truth. Remission wasn't cure. Her mortality remained. A countdown clock neither could see, but both could hear ticking in the spaces between heartbeats. So they loved harder, lived brighter, refused to let fear steal the time they'd been given. And every Thursday, without fail, they went to the cemetery and lit candles for the dead, a mortal girl and an immortal man, bearing witness together to the beauty of finite light in infinite darkness. 3 years passed. Iris remained in remission, her body holding steady against the disease that had tried to claim her. She and Malachi fell into a life that felt almost normal, If normal included a 400-year-old vampire and the woman who'd taught him hope wasn't foolish. She moved into his house officially, bringing books and plants and chaos into spaces that had been too orderly for too long. Her presence transformed the mansion from a museum into a home, laundry on Victorian furniture, grocery lists stuck to centuries-old mirrors, laughter echoing in rooms that had forgotten the sound. "You're destroying my aesthetic," Malachi complained, finding her sneakers abandoned in his study. "Your aesthetic was beautiful corpse waiting for death," Iris retorted. "I'm upgrading you to beautiful corpse with a life." He couldn't argue. She was right. But immortality and mortality coexisting created strange tensions. Iris aged, subtly but noticeably to someone who'd watched centuries pass. Tiny lines appeared at her eyes. Her hair showed its first silver threads. Her body changed in the way bodies do when they're living rather than frozen. Malachi noticed every change with the intensity of someone cataloging a treasure before it vanished. He took photographs obsessively. Iris reading, Iris laughing, Iris asleep in morning light, building an archive against inevitable loss. "You're being morbid," she said, catching him photographing her making coffee. "I'm being thorough." He lowered the camera. "When you're gone, these images will be all I have. Let me collect them." "I'm 26, not dying." "You're mortal. Same thing from my perspective." The argument became familiar, her insisting on living in the present, him unable to stop seeing the future where she didn't exist. It created friction, small fights that weren't really about dishes or schedules, but about the fundamental impossibility of their situation. One night, after a particularly bitter argument about her taking risks he considered unnecessary, rock climbing of all things, they stood in separate rooms, silence heavy between them. Iris found him eventually in the memory room, standing before photographs of Maria, his lost Victorian love. "I'm not her," Iris said quietly. "I know. I'm not going to live my life wrapped in cotton wool because you're afraid of losing me. That's not living. That's just slowly suffocating." Malachi turned to her, and his expression was devastated. "I've loved 4 women in 400 years, Iris. 4. Do you know why so few? Because this—" He gestured between them. "This destroys me every time. Maria aged and died. I held her hand at 93 while she barely recognized me, thought I was her grandson, and I wanted to die with her, but couldn't. So what are you saying? That we should end this?" "No." His voice broke. "I'm saying I don't know how to love you without trying to preserve you, without seeing every choice you make as potentially the one that takes you from me. I know it's irrational. I know it's suffocating. But I've had 400 years to develop terrible habits, and protecting what I love is the worst of them." Iris crossed to him, took his face in her hands. "Then learn new habits. Trust me to know my limits. Trust that I want to live fully in the time I have. Not carefully. If I die rock climbing or in a car accident or just randomly, at least I died doing something that made me feel alive. That's not comforting. It's not supposed to be. It's supposed to be true." She pressed her forehead to his. "I love you, but I won't become a butterfly pinned under glass just because you can't bear the thought of me flying away." He held her then, this impossible girl who'd invaded his carefully controlled existence and refused to be controlled herself. "I'll try," he whispered. "I'll try to let you live without constantly calculating risks. But Iris, if something happens to you because I stopped being vigilant, then that's on fate, not you. You're not my keeper, Malachi. You're my partner. There's a difference." They made peace that night, but the tension never fully disappeared. It couldn't. They were living on borrowed time, and both knew it, him with the certainty of experience, her with the courage of someone who refused to let death win before it arrived. Iris started writing. Stories about immortals and mortals finding each other across impossible divides. about love that survived despite, or because of, its temporary nature. She published under a pseudonym, and her work found an audience hungry for tragic, redemptive romance. "You're making us famous," Malachi said, reading her latest novel. "I'm making us universal," she corrected. "Every mortal who's loved someone immortal, even metaphorically, will recognize this. Every person who's felt like time was their enemy. This is how we matter beyond ourselves." He looked at her with such pride and pain intertwined. "You're going to outlive yourself through these stories. That's the idea." But even as her career blossomed and their love deepened, the fundamental reality remained. She was aging. He wasn't. The gap between them widened imperceptibly but inevitably. At 28, Iris found her first gray hairs that weren't just strands, but patches. Her knees began aching after long walks. Small things, age-appropriate things, but each one reminded them both that her clock was ticking while his stood still. "I'm thinking about the future," she said one Thursday at the cemetery, lighting candles beside him. "About when I'm 50, 60, 70? Will you still want me then? When I'm old and you're still frozen at 29? Malachi set down his candle and turned to her. "Iris, I will want you when you're 90, and I have to carry you to these graves because your legs won't hold you. I will want you when your mind forgets my name, but your soul still recognizes me. I will want you as ash in an urn I'll keep on my mantle for the next 3 centuries. His voice was fierce. "Age doesn't diminish you to me. It proves you lived. Every wrinkle is a story. Every scar is survival. You'll be beautiful at 90 in ways you can't imagine at 28. Promise? I've loved you through medical crisis and daily mundanity. I'll love you through every stage of life you have left." He kissed her, cool lips against warm. "That's not the question. The question is, can you accept being loved by someone who never changes while you do?" "I don't know," she admitted. "Ask me again in 20 years. "I will." He smiled sadly. "I'll ask you every year until you can't answer anymore. And then I'll keep loving you anyway." They finished lighting candles as night fell, 2 souls defying mathematics and mortality, choosing love despite its inevitable expiration date. Comment forever if you'd love someone knowing every day together brings you closer to goodbye. Iris lived to 67, 44 years with Malachi, longer than either had dared hope when she was diagnosed at 23. The disease came back twice more, and each time she fought it into submission through sheer stubborn will and cutting-edge treatment Malachi's medical knowledge helped secure. She wrote 17 novels, raised awareness for autoimmune conditions, turned their cemetery into a registered historical site, lived so fully that when people asked her secret, she'd smile and say, "I fell in love with someone who taught me that every moment is already infinite if you pay attention." But time was undefeated. At 67, her body finally said enough. The disease returned aggressively, and this time, the treatments couldn't hold it back. She spent her final months in their house, the Victorian mansion that had become truly theirs, surrounded by books and memories and a vampire who'd loved her through every year, every change, every transformation. Malachi cared for her with the skill of a physician and the tenderness of a devoted husband. He read to her when she was too weak to hold books, played music from across their decades together, carried her to windows so she could see the garden she'd planted, now mature and wild. "I don't regret anything," she told him one evening, her voice thin but certain. "Not one day, not one choice, especially not you. I regret that I get centuries more, and you only got 67 years. His hand was cool against her fevered forehead. "Quality over quantity," she whispered. "I got to love and be loved by someone who'd lived 400 years and chose me anyway. How many humans can say that?" "Not enough." His voice cracked. "Never enough." On her final Thursday, Iris asked for one last trip to the cemetery. Malachi carried her. She weighed almost nothing now. Her body eaten away by disease, and settled her in a chair he'd brought. The November air was cold, but she insisted on being there, among the graves she'd tended for 44 years. Together, for the last time, they lit candles. His hands were steady, hers trembled, but they managed. 50 candles across 50 graves, small lights against the encroaching dark. "This is where it started," Iris said, looking at him with eyes that still held all the love they'd ever contained, even as her body failed. "You, watching me light candles. Me, not knowing I was bringing light to someone who'd lived in darkness for so long." "You saved me," Malachi said, "not from being a vampire, from forgetting why immortality might be worth enduring. And you saved me from being invisible." She touched his face. "Thank you for seeing me. For 44 years, thank you for seeing me." He carried her home as the candles burned down. She died that night, in their bed, with Malachi holding her hand and whispering every language of love he'd learned in 4 centuries. Her last words were, "Don't stop lighting candles." He promised. Malachi kept every promise. He buried Iris in the cemetery they'd tended together, beneath an oak tree where they'd first spoken. Her headstone was simple: Iris Caldwell, 2002-2069. She brought light to the forgotten and taught the immortal to hope. Every Thursday, without fail, he came. He lit candles at her grave and every other grave in the cemetery. He spoke to her, telling her about his week, about the world changing around them, about how much he missed her laugh and her chaos, and her stubborn insistence that love was always worth the pain. He donated to autoimmune research in her name, established a foundation, ensuring the cemetery remained maintained in perpetuity, published her final, unfinished novel, with profits going to chronically ill writers. Years passed, then decades. At 100 years after her death, Malachi still came every Thursday. Now ancient even by vampire standards, 500 years old, he moved through the cemetery like a guardian spirit, lighting candles, remembering names, bearing witness to the forgotten. Other people began joining him. At first, just a few, curious about the pale man who never aged and always came on Thursdays. Then more, learning the tradition from him, bringing their own candles, speaking to their own dead. The cemetery became a place of light and memory, exactly as Iris had wanted. Malachi trained successors, mortals who learned the ritual, who promised to continue after he finally found his ending. Because even immortals don't last forever, and he'd made peace with that. When his time came, whether by choice or catastrophe, the candles would keep burning. On the 200th anniversary of her death, Malachi stood before Iris's grave with hundreds of candles surrounding him, placed by the community that had embraced her legacy. "I kept my promises," he told her headstone. "I lived, I helped, I remembered, and I taught others to remember. You changed the world, Iris. Not just my world, the whole world. People light candles now in cemeteries across the country because of the movement you started." He placed a final candle at her grave, a special one, enchanted by a witch he'd befriended to burn for a century without extinguishing. "I'll see you soon," he said quietly. "Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not for another century. But I'm tired, love. I've lived 500 years, and 44 of them with you. The math is clear. Nothing else comes close." He smiled. "When I finally walk into sunlight or find whatever ending calls me, I hope you're there. I hope there's something after. Not heaven or hell, just light. The kind you brought to dark places." He kissed her headstone and stood. Around him, the cemetery blazed with candles, hundreds, thousands, a constellation of defiant light against the dark. Each flame represented someone remembered, someone loved, someone who'd mattered. Malachi walked through the lights, greeting the living who'd come to honor the dead, teaching them names and stories, bearing witness the way Iris had taught him. And when he finally left, not disappearing but simply walking into the night, shoulders lighter than they'd been in centuries. The candles kept burning. Because some lights, once kindled, refused to go out. Some loves, even ended, never stop illuminating. And some promises, made between mortal and immortal, echo through centuries, proving that the finite and the eternal can touch, can transform each other, can create something beautiful precisely because it cannot last forever. Epilogue. 300 years later, in a cemetery that had become a pilgrimage site, a young woman lit her first candle. She didn't know the full story, just fragments passed down through generations. Something about a girl who'd started a tradition and a mysterious man who'd kept it alive for centuries. As she knelt before a grave marked Iris Caldwell, she felt a presence, not threatening, just watchful, protective. "Is someone there?" she whispered. No answer, just whined through old oaks, and the flicker of 1,000 candles kept burning by a community that refused to let the dead, or their stories, fade into darkness. The girl lit her candle, adding its small light to the greater illumination. And somewhere in the spaces between life and death, between mortal and eternal, between memory and presence, Iris and Malachi watched together, forever proving that love, once kindled like a candle in the dark, burns on long after its flame should have died. Subscribe if you believe mercy can resurrect even the damned, and that love, even finite love, echoes forever. Comment eternal if you'd light candles for someone across centuries. Like if you believe some souls find each other again, beyond death, beyond time, in the spaces where light refuses to surrender to dark.